Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another special episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research, and I'm delighted to be hosting a speaker roundtable at the North American Supply Chain Executive Summit 2024 in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm joined by some of the speakers and delegates attending that event, and I think we're going to have a great conversation about some supply chain issues that really matter. I'd love to go around the table and have everyone introduce themselves.
My name is Phyllis Dyson. I'm Vice President of Global Product Supply for Duracell, a Berkshire Hathaway company. I also have experience with Procter & Gamble and Robert Bosch Corporation.
Thank you very much for hosting this. My name is Sidra Tufail. I take care of operations, customer service, supply chain for Philip Morris International. I take care of their Americas region, which is predominantly Latin America and Canada. And previously was working with Unilever in ice cream. So from ice cream into an interesting smoke-free vision company. That's a little bit about myself.
Hi, Joanna Kosteka. I'm the VP of Cloud Supply Chain Planning for Microsoft. I was with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise before, ABB, Honeywell, and Japanese Automotive. Thank you.
I'm Becky Crane. I lead our manufacturing, engineering, and global safety teams and environmental for General Mills. So we are over 10,000 strong, and I have been with General Mills for over 21 years and currently reside in Minnesota.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. I think it's going to be a great conversation. I want to start off by talking a little bit about how we generated our questions. In the run-up to the event, and I think this applies to all of you as well, our delegates were asked to identify some business challenges, some things that they wanted to talk about on site. We received more than 750 submissions, and I went through them all and categorized them and weighed them based on popularity, and I do this every year. And I was fascinated, since the pandemic, the response has always been resiliency. We're in an age of disruption. Supply chain people have to make it work no matter what. And this year, that is not the top issue. It's actually the 9th most popular. The most popular thing was controlling costs. Now, I don't want to have a conversation about us eating our vegetables, but I look at that data and I say, are supply chain executives getting back into the things that made them great, that made them valuable to their company in the first place, back to the things where they contribute the most? And I wonder, has that been your experience in your organization? Do you feel you're still fighting fires, or are you getting proactive and back to what makes you great at your job?
I think for Duracell, it's the opposite. We thrived during the pandemic. Now, we stopped doing things like value stream mapping and really focusing on how to be as lean as possible and deliver the biggest savings. It wasn't all about cost. When we went through the pandemic, we really turned the table and we were able to move capacity all around the world. We stayed ahead of the competition. Our ocean freight costs were like less than 10% of the competition's. So we thrived during that. And I think since the pandemic, the only thing that's changed is that the volume lift that we got during the pandemic, it wasn't sustained. And so we're still having to be just as resilient, just as agile, but now we're coming back to adding the value stream mapping elements into it because the geopolitical situation in the world has not gone back to pre-pandemic levels. So you don't have the luxury of moving from focusing on service and supply only to going back to just focusing on the most cost-efficient supply chains. I mean, we still have to be resilient. We still have to be risk-averse, and we still have to be proactive in managing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll build on that. I think that's a great take in terms of resilience. As much as we want it to be out, I believe that this is going to be part of the design of supply chains in the future. And for sure, COVID taught us a lot, but I don't think it's going to be, it's not going to leave us because, it was COVID and now, the definition of external factors that impact us continue to grow and expand. So in Philip Morris, we are putting in a lot of focus on resilience by design. But answering your question, do we have now something that's taken the top 2 or 3 and resilience takes number 9? As much as there's focus to have more conscious effort towards what are the areas that are going to help us, kind of go through any further crisis or chaos. My top 1 or 2 right now are more around new products, new categories, and how we can get forecasts in line with consumer demands, kind of a conventional supply chain topic, if I may, but with much more focus towards a very changing consumer landscape. Regardless of the product category, the consumer is wanting preferences in terms of speed to market. If they have a marketplace that they can get their product from, they want everything there. So, we're really channeling our efforts towards developing a supply chain which is much more responsive to consumers than it was in the past, and to give us a competitive advantage, but at the same time putting the needs of the consumer in the center of whatever we do.
So for us, and I think for many supply chains, I think, resiliency kind of became part of DNA. So I'm not surprised that, you're now hearing this is like topic number 9, because I think many companies probably did the same thing. So it's just part of how you behave and part of your inbuilt processes, if you like. But since we are the company that is building the world's AI infrastructure, and you heard that word, mentioned I don't know how many times over the last few days, obviously, what comes with that is, and I'm sure this is also very intuitive, is scale, right? And the speed of that growth. So what we're doing and what we're looking at is, well, how do you do this at speed? How do you scale at speed, that massive growth, right? And how do you do it in the most efficient and effective manner? So we are, as we're doing that, within supply chain, and as I mentioned, I own planning, so we're definitely doing that in my space, and I know my peers are doing it the same thing. We're looking at things like our processes. How can we simplify? How can we get faster? How can we get more efficient? We're deploying AI assistants for things that are like, mundane tasks, so that our people can actually, use their knowledge, that intelligence, and spend that time on value-added tasks versus, now I'm going to plow through data to find something and it's going to take me hours or days. Now I can use an AI assistant and get that answer within minutes and spend that time on something far more, exciting and bringing us further. So that's what we're focusing on.
So I think, so much of what has been said already with these 3 amazing women who I just met, which is amazing. And then we had Monique yesterday, and she said this as well, too. I work in manufacturing, and we love demand. We want as much demand, not too much. It's almost like Goldilocks, right? I'm like Baby Bear. I want it just enough demand to keep everything full, but not too much that I'm like, having to, make everybody work weekends and so much overtime. So I think during the pandemic, we saw this really crazy, huge surge in demand across so much of supply chain. And whether it was real, people were at home as a food company, we saw an increase in consumption, or it was a product of the supply chains that were shut down, and there were bubbles in the systems, and there was constraints. And so it felt like there was this enormous amount of demand all over the system, where we're starting to level out now. And so I think the path ahead is, what is the true end-to-end ecosystem to be able to manage through a continual volatile environment. And that is end-to-end. We've got some planning expert here with Planning Makes the World Go Round, and if you've got a great demand plan with then a great ability to supply, and then partnership with your business across your end-to-end ecosystem, that is true advantage no matter what the business conditions. And so what we're really working on is, how do we make this ecosystem so that it actually is agnostic to the ecosystem or the current conditions? We're able to compete no matter what.
Well, when I'm going around the table and listening to what you said, I'm also thinking of that list of things that people said, this is a challenge we're facing or something we're very interested in. And all of you touched on the idea of forecasting a little bit. So why don't we move down the list of forecasting? And I heard yesterday something that is going to resonate with me for a long while. The nice thing about a forecast is it's always wrong. But for too long. But with that said, I think everyone can agree the way of doing this pre-pandemic, that method is now outdated. It needs to be re-examined. It needs to be maybe reinvented. And I wonder if we can speak a little bit about what your organizations are doing to improve their forecasting and get better at it.
I'll talk about demand planning and then supply forecast.
Please.
On the demand side, our commercial leaders do a good job of, above the line, below the line, volume building buckets. And so that's very much alive. If we lose any volume, we're quickly looking below the line to see what else we can quickly accelerate and pull above the line. So there's a replacement cycle that works out pretty well. The other thing that we've done that I think has been breakthrough is in our S&OP process, we set up a strategy and with KPIs that looks at the financial forecast, the sales forecast, and the product supply forecast. And we actually track whether or not they're all within 2% of each other. So if you have a physical volume forecast that's less than 2% versus the financial forecast, then we're in pretty good shape. Because what was happening in the past was you'd have a forecast based on the physical volume assumptions. Finance would say, oh, I don't want to commit to that much, and it would be way much lower or much higher, because we're driving growth. So now we have that handshake that each president of each sector has to sign off on. And that's been a huge enabler for us to kind of level out. And then we can focus more on understanding what the high side is that we need to protect for. And so that process has worked really well for us. And that's new. And when I say new for us, again, we're a young company. And when we divested from Procter & Gamble, I mean, we stood up, we separated from all systems, and we had to stand up a fresh company. And we just really started from scratch. And it feels good because once you're a part of all the big systems within, a company as large as P&G, and then it's a small company doing it on your own, the things that are really critical come to play. And we called it blocking and tackling. So we focused on the things that, like on a football field, basic blocking and tackling. Let's get those right. And then that's made a huge impact on our demand. Now, where we've also made some big improvements is translating those demand requirements and that demand into supply requirements. We have a very strong process. We have a team that meets weekly. It's a global 360 team. And in 20 minutes, we go around the world and we look at process control measures, not output KPIs, but process control measures. And we quickly can tell where there's demand that we're not capable of covering or whether or not we're sufficient. So we answer the question each week, every week, are we sufficient?
I'll just build on that. Look, for my industry, it's like we have one product category which is switching off and the other product category which is switching on, and we're very intentional about that, right? I spoke about that also in the session earlier. So one of the categories, which is our conventional cigarettes category, super stable, predictable demand. So when it comes to forecasting and predictive tools, that's differentiated by the fact that you could almost go into a statistical forecast and I hate to use the word, but might be a possibility to even go touchless, right? Because you're not going to have big events. Now, on the other hand, imagine you have a new product where even the consumer doesn't know how they're going to respond to that product. How do you build? You don't have history. You can have some comparisons. But is the consumer going to respond to the sort of products we're comparing with? Not sure. And that's where, as much as I'm a big fan of forecasting because we need predictability and we need to give something to our supply teams to work on, there are a couple of things that we're doing. First is, for the new categories, we operate with demand corridors. So what's going to be my base? What's going to be my bull? What's going to be my bear? This is the corridor, their business team. It's great if you oversell or undersell, but, these are the guardrails that we're going to define so that I'm able to give you a good, decent supply of the product. But at the same time, it's what a pity if you have products that are overselling and you continue to say that to the business team that I have these guardrails. You've got to bring in agility. So what we do, of course, look into is how quickly can we respond? What are those early signals that you start getting from offtake data, points of sale, instead of building historical forecast that goes into statistics that takes about 3 months usually during demand sensing processes? How can I begin to leverage on points of sale data that could give me already in the first 1 or 2 weeks a little bit about how the consumers are responding to the product? So I don't want to say, I want to put a provocative question on the table. Is demand sensing overrated?
Yes.
Especially if you have new categories, right? Is it overrated? Maybe it was something which was great for your stable portfolio, but we got to have a much differentiated planning strategy for new products. And there, it's more about response than getting the forecast right.
Terrific. Anything that you two would like to add?
So for us, forecasting is probably a little different than what it is for most supply chains. And I've been across several big companies, and here is what it is different. So in a typical supply chain, you forecast what's new, meaning you forecast the demand that is going to come to you, and you're going to make your revenue because you're going to build something or, manufacture something and you're going to sell it. For us, the interesting aspect of it is you also forecast what you have already done, meaning what is already deployed. So think about data centers, right? You think about all those, racks and servers standing there, and your customers, they are paying for usage. They are using your infrastructure, right? That fluffy cloud that, we all see, it runs on hardware, right? That is what makes the cloud run. So we continuously forecast and reforecast the utilization of what already is and what the new growth is going to be as we're building the new data centers, as we're deploying additional capacity. So this is how it's very, very different, right? So it's almost like being, an electricity company and knowing, when the Smiths come home, they're going to switch on this equipment and that equipment, and there's going to be an uptake in, how much they use, right? So you have to be ready for that. So we continuously reforecast that. And, I actually have a big team of data scientists who are doing statistical forecasting. That's one of their main job tasks, if you like. And we have super sophisticated algorithms, ML, AI for all of that forecasting part, just because of how critical it is, because you have to be available at 99.9999999. Back to the points that were made yesterday, the customer cannot feel that something happened. There cannot be a downtime, right? It all has to operate smoothly, and you have to be ready for that. So I have to be really, really accurate. So this is how it's different. So it happens on the usage, you forecast usage, and then you translate it into hardware, right? And then you talk about, so what is, number one, that growth? What are the new products that are coming in? What are the things that we know from the market? Who are the big customers that we will be getting deals with? And this is where, again, I'm going to go back to AI. But one of the things we have done recently this year is we deployed an AI assistant that actually looks at and predicts the probability of big deals from those mega big customers, of them materializing, and the time of when would that actually happen. And it works like a charm because we're hitting more than 85% of predictability, which, is really hard when you're talking big deals, right? So that's proving really, really successful. And back to the points that, I think both of you were already making. So forecasting is one thing, right? But that forecast has to translate into a plan that gets adopted by the organization. Otherwise, it's like, okay, great, you plan something, but who cares, right? So it actually has to be the plan that drives the company, right? So that alignment with finance and with the business partners, we call them EGs, and having a strong IBP process where we go through the rhythm of this is the plan, we approve the plan, we go with this plan, here are the rest, here are the opportunities, here are the key decisions that we're taking. And doing this religiously and having that strong alignment, to me, is key of being successful and being able to go, through that rhythm on a monthly basis. And we're doing it religiously.
Yeah.
S&OE, eliminating touches. Every time someone manually touches this data, it gets worse. It doesn't make it better. Except for I totally agree on new products. I mean, new products, it is not about getting it right because you just don't know. It's about being able to respond. And then when you think about AI and ML and all this, that's where it all comes together to say, I'm going to have the right people that know how to manage systems, not information and data, and manually put that in anymore. And then that then sets up, again, your algorithms to be able to do this. And they're going to be wrong. But if you're at 85%, that's pretty good. So, I think all of us would probably love to be at 85%.
That was fan.
Yeah, for big stuff. But, I mean, this is pretty incredible. And then what that translates into is then things that you can do is dramatic inventory and working capital reduction. As we think about things, it's not, so it goes back to the cost question, right? Mm-hmm. Working capital, waste, transit time, all these other things that drive, because inventory drives cost, and the wrong inventory drives more cost, and then you're not selling it, and you're paying to get rid of it, and you're paying to move it to go somewhere else. And, so as you figure this out, I think it's going to be a new skill set that's needed in a lot of our organizations that's evolving, but it may not be evolving fast enough. So the future, I think, again, is going to be pretty exciting. I started my career in planning, so I'm a believer, and again, planning does make the world go round. So it's going to be, I think, some pretty exciting years ahead.
I keep joking that proper planning prevents problems. The fourth piece of planning.
Yeah, in culture.
Yeah, you can't do without culture.
Well, you've anticipated, I think, the last talking point that I really want to talk about. As we were going around the table, Duracell is experiencing change. It's now standing on its own 2 feet. Philip Morris is in the process of changing what its offerings are. Microsoft, it sounds like a very exciting time. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Becky earlier. General Mills is also going through a transformation. I would love to take maybe 10 minutes at the end of this conversation and talk about change within your organizations, being leaders in an organization undergoing change, maybe some of the opportunities you're making for other leaders within your teams. And why don't we start at this end of the table this time?
Yeah. So we had a conversation yesterday about, I think this is a really super exciting time to be in supply chain. And for me, leading manufacturing, in particular manufacturing, but I think it transcends whatever function, because it's all becoming so much more intrinsically linked. Gone are the silos where you were just a planning professional, and then you went to procurement, and then you went to manufacturing, and, forbid, looking across and actually looking over to say, what do you actually do? We have so many more people that are learning different functions, and it's making us better. We're able to ask better questions, drive better decisions, solve problems faster. You see that in our results over the last 5 years. We were able, similar to Duracell, we were able to just come together, and we had the right culture that was a can-do and collaborative, and then we had the right people that had enough of a cross-functional knowledge and end-to-end that were able to elevate that, but that still was dependent on people. And so I think what you're going to see in the future here is a much more diverse set of leaders and experiences that are going to be required to lead supply chain into the future. And it's going to be about having a great culture of belonging. People are going to want to stay anywhere, whether it's supply chain or, working in retail. It's if they don't feel like they belong and it's not a company that matters even more today than it did even 50 years ago. I also think that finding new ways of working, whether that be frontline employee flexibility, we call it work with heart. So trying to find ways that work with matter, being there for moments that matter. We talked earlier today about how folks don't want to sign up for a third shift job for like the next 10 years until they get enough seniority to go up to the next one, and so on and so on. So the technology can help solve that. It exists today. We just have to figure out how to get these brilliant minds together to apply it at scale. And you think about the personal impact to that, and then what that opens up, because these are great jobs. They pay well. They provide, employment in these, really important small communities across the country, large communities alike, and can provide employment for generations to come, both at the front line and leadership. And so I think it's a very exciting time to be in manufacturing and in supply chain. And then you layer on the technology piece, and everything starts to get even more leading change, but then more exciting as you think about the years ahead. So I think this is going to be one of the coolest places to be here in the next decade. And I think, the more that we can figure out that work-life balance and the flexibility, the more that we have going to have people opt in and are going to realize how cool it is to work in supply chain and make things. So, and fluffy clouds. I like the fluffy cloud example.
Right. So I'm going to layer on the technology. I love everything you just said. So people abhor change. It's against our human nature. And I keep joking with my teams that, there are 3 things certain in life, right? Death, taxes, and change. So you can't escape. So if you can't escape it, then, quoting people much better than me, be the change you want to see and, lead that change, right? Instead of going with the flow, help drive that change, right? And I think that's where supply chain professionals get to shine. And where the technology comes now, this is this intersection of really, really interesting times. Because again, coming back to AI, some people are scared, some people are excited. How do you go through the barrier of stopping the fear and making it something that is very natural to you, right? Like, I think we all got used to, using Alexas in our houses, right? And probably it wasn't that intuitive the very first, few days. So what we have done internally in the company, like one of my peers has rolled out a phenomenal training for all of our employees around how do you actually use Copilot? And we've, I have mandated it for all of my team. Like, you have to, this isn't optional, you have to, because it will make you feel so much more comfortable. And I did it with them, right? You again, be part of what you want to drive. And we did it, and people feel so much more comfortable. And again, from things like summarize the meeting, when you're late to a meeting, it will tell you, oh, your name was mentioned here and here are your action items. So from small things like that make your life easier and again, allow you to spend your valuable time on solving the problems other than how do I get to the data, what is actually the problem, et cetera, et cetera. I think that is the breakthrough that we're all going to see in supply chain. We will actually get to those solutions, to those answers much faster than what we were ever able to do. So if you go back like those 2-3 years ago when we had all this supply chain crisis, and you think back to how many of us were plowing through spreadsheets and systems to okay, what is it really? When is it coming? How bad is it, right? I don't think there were many companies, and I wasn't at Microsoft at the time, that had the data at their fingertips to say, this is what it's going to be, this is when it's going to come, this is what we need to do, and. And I think that is what the future actually is going to be with what we're all building. And I think that's the exciting part, and it's, the opportunities are infinite. And, back to the point that you were making, I think bringing more female leaders into supply chain, but also more diversity is really, really important, and something that we're focusing on, making sure that our teams are diverse, that diverse voices are heard, because this is when you truly get the power of different perspectives, right? This is what I joke, 2 + 2 = 5. We want those 5s, right? Rather than just 4s. So,
Luke, for me, change is I think a lot of things in supply chain taught us that it's just the beginning, it's not the end. I take the example, you guys like X-Men, the series?
Yes.
So there's a character, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but there's a character in there that's Mystique, which is the blue character that changes shape and form and even voice and can become. So I tell my teams, guys, that's agility for me.
I wonder if you could expand upon that.
Yes, sure. So change is inevitable, and what keeps me up at night is, what does that constantly changing framework mean for our teams? There is a lot of business as usual activities that continue, but during a time of a new launch or a time of a crisis, it is the same teams that show up. And we've seen that supply chain, was managing the business in a way during the COVID times. So are our teams towards, a journey of that constant, high-performing expectation from leaders and moving towards a burnout? I wonder, should we create that safe space where they can, allow us as leaders to prioritize for them and say, you know what, I'm going to take care of this tomorrow or the day after, because there are other things. So the ability for us to enable those decision-making. And, I always say the one thing that a lot of industries are not good at is prioritization, because we want everything done tomorrow or today if possible. So for me personally, as a leader, what I try to do is, how can we create that safe space and that culture where people can actually come in and say, there's a lot happening, and how, help us to prioritize. I would also say, as much as we're talking about AI and digitalization and the fact that that'll be a big game changer, the pace of change around those topics is not fast enough for our teams to then focus on business decisions versus a lot of, data crunching, numbers being put together, etc. So that's an area, and it's a call to action for supply chain professionals that if we really want to, converge towards a touchless, technology-driven, the change around AI has to be much more enabling us. And look, last but not the least, I would say supply chain always has fantastic professionals. They make scenarios. One day they're business owners. The next day they're part of IBP, difficult conversations, gloves on, gloves off meetings. We got to make sure that, that we're taking care of them. That's as as a leader and as a servant leader, I would say, listen to the voice of your teams, because they'll have a lot to tell you about what's happening during times of change.
Absolutely.
Great perspectives. Thank you. Very good. I just want to say, this may sound odd, but thank you, COVID. I mean, supply chain, no one knew what it was. During COVID, the newscasters constantly, talked about supply chain management. It was as if they learned, they learned a new word and they used it all the time. Every time we heard it in my household, we danced and we said we ought to drop a quarter in for every time we hear it. So, I mean, COVID really did bring this career path to life. And I love it. I get to now, and I think it's change and evolution, because it's not the old focus on a demand plan and then fight with the plant on you can't be a volume hog, or overproduction is the worst defect of all. It causes all these other sins. So it's not that anymore. It's different now. I get to travel the world and go figure out, go walk supply chains and see China to India, China to the U.S., all the other ASEAN countries. What are they offering? Vietnam, why is everybody moving to Vietnam? What's the difference between Southern and Northern Vietnam? What's going on with corporate tax? Who really is truly adhering to the country of origin rules, and where are we at risk? I get to do all that every day, and it's so exciting. And then even more so, post-COVID supply chain, we find ourselves being the liaison between all these multifunctional groups. So, leading cross-functional teams is really a skill now that you have to practice. Whereas before, not as much. It was more pushing a rope. Now it's, being the liaison between the plants and procurement, and making sure procurement has the right requirements with the right sensitivities and can negotiate for us without penalties. Making sure the plants, have enough capacity to demand coverage where they can run an efficient plant and still make improvements and improve the cost of goods, served. And then the interface with franchise and R&D to make sure that, we have the right lineup, in serving our customers. So it's great. I mean, it's really exciting. It feels like evolution to me, and less change. And that's possibly also because my company is very entrepreneurial. We're a startup. We're doing this, so it's heavy lifting, but it's been a lot of fun. So now it feels good, and it's exciting to see. So I hope we continue on that path. I think that, and I mentioned it yesterday, I think that with the kind of the disparaging of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and right now that we hear in politics, I hope it's just a fad. I hope it's not a turn. I hope we're not going backwards, because I think we did enough work in the 90s and the early 2000s to make the business case for diversity, and it's true. A diverse team, diversity of thought, they deliver better results, and we represent our consumer base. I hope what I'm hearing with these anti-cases for diversity in schools and in the workplace, I hope that goes away soon, because I don't think it'll hurt businesses in the end.
I just want to add one point to that, and especially around, the sort of roles that we can play as leaders to encourage women to be in, I would say, very operational roles. Let's not underestimate, and it's something I stumbled upon both when I was in Unilever as well as now in Philip Morris. The infrastructural needs for women are different.
Yes.
And we got to talk about that, and we put that on the table, and I consider them as low-hanging because that's something in our control. Let's not underestimate that the infrastructure is done, because in many times that's a big enabler, and that small action can truly make a big difference.
I teach personal career management to women in the company, and we're starting to expand it to other people. And what we've encouraged them to do is exactly that. And we've asked them to think about how many assignments you plan on working, and not necessarily how many years. So if you're at the beginning of your career, you may have 10 assignments to plan before you want to retire. And think about it in terms of those manageable chunks as opposed to 30 years, which can be overwhelming. And think about for each one of those assignments and the level that you want to get to, what are the skills I need, the experiences I need, and the people that I need to know and build strong relationships with. And we actually map out a career plan for them that helps them look towards the future. And the whole purpose is we own making sure it's a level playing field. But when I tap you on the shoulder, I need you to be ready to play. And that's what we're focusing on.
Well, this has been wonderful. I feel like we could be having this conversation all day. Of course, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I really appreciate everything that you've shared. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it was fun.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. Thanks for joining us.